Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Kathy Gillespie,
with students
Dakari Chapman
and me, Tova Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America. I'm Janine Turner, founder and co-president of Constituting America. Welcome to Constitutional Chats. We're thrilled you're here with us today. We are very, very excited. We have a very, 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 very special guest, the author of this wonderful book that's also our book club book for the month, Written on the Heart. He is a philosopher, essentially many things, many hats, but a philosopher, and he's a professor at the University of Texas. Our professor, J. Budziszewski. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Yes.
Yay! I'm so impressed with We're thrilled to have him with us. We're going to be talking about preserving natural law today. It's the fourth in our part series in natural law. Today we're talking about why it matters to you, and we're thrilled that you're with us. So come on in. I'm going to introduce the panel in one sec. We have a little poll to put up. And let us know your age range so we can make sure that we speak to you in the manner with which if we have students, we want everybody to be able to understand. So yes, I want to introduce our fabulous Aubrey Jackman.
So our poll results show that we have the most fans today with 32%. And then we have 26% parents or grandparents with children, then 19% friends, 6% donors, and 3% family. And we are so excited for all of you to be here with us today.
Yay. Thank you, Aubrey. Yeah. Aubrey, say hi again. So I don't know if anybody can see your face. So
yes. Hi.
Okay, good. They got to. All right, now I'm introducing the fabulous and the oh so wonderful co-president of Constituting America. We're like a two wings of a bird, a right wing and a left wing. We don't mean that politically. I just like saying right and left, but don't take that in a political way. But we're the right wing and left wing of an eagle, let's just say. And we without Kathy, I'd be flapping around on the ground and nothing would be happening. But also your donations are the wind beneath our wings. So we thank you so much. We would not even get off the ground without you. So Kathy, say hello. Let me introduce Kathy a little bit though. Kathy was a chief of staff on the Hill for decades. And she's also the former commissioner on the President's Commission on White House Fellows. And she's currently one of the 16 esteemed private citizens, serving on the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission, helping to organize our country's 250th birthday in 2026. And Kathy is just a heart of gold, most wonderful person in the world. Kathy Gillespie, say hello.
Well, thank you, Janine. And hi, everyone. We want to thank our sponsor today, Jan Elliott of Uvalde, Texas. Now, Jan has been a generous and enthusiastic supporter of Constituting America since our early days. And I just want to tell you a little bit about Jan because she's such an amazing person. She grew up in Abilene, Texas, graduated from Texas Tech University, and was married to her beloved Tex Elliott for 46 years. Jan is an active member of the Texas Cattlewomen and is a wonderful philanthropic supporter of many causes, including the Briscoe Western Art Museum in San Antonio, which I visited, and it's beautiful and fabulous. And so, Jan, we thank you for all the ways you so generously support our Constitution education programs. Your prayers, energy, enthusiasm, and generous gifts, as Janine said, are the wind beneath our wings. So thank you for your sponsorship of our show today.
Okay, now I'm going to introduce Julian Jordan Gilbert. Julian Jordan Gilbert, the extraordinary former winners of Constituting America. We're so impressed by them, and they're new to our panel. We're so thrilled they're co-hosting with us now. Jewel Gilbert is the executive producer, and Jordan Gilbert is operations director of Sing for America, a family-based company that the brothers co-founded. Sing for America seeks to show the art of truth and light through live performance. Both are proud former We the People contest winners. Okay, Sing for America is an actor-run theater group which specializes in semi-professional musicals, private training in the arts, school drama solutions, and public entertainment events, all while revealing a colorblind world on stage. They're recent graduates of Moravian College, where they earned a BA in a musical performance and dramatic production. Julian and Jordan, everyone is always so impressed with the two of you and your questions. And I just want to say hi. And I got a question for you. Are y'all twins? I've never asked that over these years.
Me and
Are
Jordan?
we twins?
Yeah.
No, we're 2.5 years apart.
Oh,
Yeah.
who's the older?
Me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
okay,
older.
Good deal.
Jordan's birthday was yesterday.
Oh, happy
Actually.
birthday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't, all these years I've known y'all and I didn't even know that. Okay. All right. Well, great.
Everybody at school always thought we were twins. Everyone at Moravian, because we took a bunch of the same classes too, because that way we could share the work. And so we just let them think it.
Well, welcome to the show. We're thrilled y'all are here. Okie dokie. So Jeanette, do a quick hello, Jeanette. Jeanette is our director of, what are you a director of?
Director of Operations.
Thank you. I've only known Jeanette for 11 years, and I've only known that for 11 years. But I just had a COVID vaccine yesterday, so maybe that's why, our day before, maybe that's why my brain is a little, what are you? What? Director of what? That's it. Jeanette, oh, so fabulous, Jeanette, Director of Operations. We give speeches together, and she's just the most wonderful person on the planet. Say hello, Jeanette.
Hello, and thank you very much, Janine. If you want to want us to come and visit you, just get onto the webpage and follow the directions, and Janine and I will come to your group or school and virtually do a Constitution lesson with you. On to you.
That's right. Or civil civic conversation, which we're doing very early in the morning tomorrow, are we not?
Yes.
Tomorrow. All righty. Now, drum roll, please. We're so thrilled to have with us today Dr. Budziszewski. Budziszewski. I've got it now. Budziszewski. What a name, right? Dr. B, he said we can call him, is a professor of government and philosophy at the University of Texas, Austin, where he teaches courses in the law school and the religious studies department. He specializes in political philosophy, ethical philosophy, legal philosophy, and the interaction of religion with philosophy. Oh my gosh, Mr. Budziszewski, I would come to Austin and I would major so I could be in all of your classes because I love philosophy. Every single one of those classes I would love to take. Among his research interests are classical natural law, virtue ethics. We're so used to saying virtual. Like, what are virtual ethics? Wow. It's the COVID vaccination. Just bear with me. Virtue ethics, conscience and moral self-deception. Oh, wow. How cool. Conscience and moral self-deception. The Institute of the Family in relation to political and social order, religion and public life, and the problem of toleration. Okay, so cool. Dr. B is the author of over 15 books, including the one that is our current selection of our Constituting America book club, Written on the Heart, The Case for Natural Law. So, Dr. B, welcome, and thanks for putting up with that introduction there for about 10 minutes. But tell us about your book, Written on the Heart, The Case for Natural Law. Who is it for? What do you cover? And what is happening with natural law today? Just a few little questions there.
Sure, Janine, I'm glad to tell you. My book, Written on the Heart, is really for everyone, especially students, and it's about the natural law. We're not talking about the natural physical law like gravity, but about the natural moral law. So let's talk about just what that is. The teachers of our student listeners are going to scold me for using a double negative, but have you ever noticed that there are some things about right and wrong that we can't not know? Things that it's impossible for an undamaged human being to be ignorant about. Even children know some of these things. Consider the golden rule. When Mama says to little Johnny, "Don't pull your sister's hair. How would you like it if she pulled your hair?" Johnny's embarrassed. Why? Because he can see for himself that he shouldn't do to her what he wouldn't want her to do to him, just like he can see for himself that 4 is greater than 3. Sure, teaching helps, but teaching wouldn't make any impress on him if he couldn't see that what was being taught to him was true. There are a lot of moral truths like this. You could call them 10 Commandments kinds of things, but they're at least vaguely known even where people have never heard of the 10 Commandments. People in every place and time know that they shouldn't steal, they shouldn't murder, they shouldn't have contempt for God, and things like that. Now, I'm not saying that they always know these rules clearly, or that they always know the details, or that they always follow them, or that they never fudge and make excuses. Obviously, that wouldn't be true. But at least some dim knowledge of the moral basics is universal. Philosophers call these moral basics the natural law or the natural moral law. They're called natural because they tell how creatures with a rational human nature, that's us, need to live in order to flourish. The Bible has a name for them too, calling them the law written on the heart. And that gives me the title for the book. The natural knowledge of these moral basics is really so inescapable that you may have noticed people use it even when they make excuses for doing wrong. Not even the murderer says that it's right to take innocent human life. No, he makes excuses like, that guy wasn't human, he was a cockroach. Not even the guy who cheats on the test says that it's good to lie about what he knows. No, he makes excuses like, I really do know this stuff, I just can't remember it. So you see how that works? The founders of the American Republic, we're talking about the Constitution after all, firmly believed in the natural moral law. The Declaration of Independence calls it the laws of nature and nature's God. The expression laws of nature there reminds us that the moral basics are rules for human nature. The expression nature's God reminds us that God is the creator of our nature. So he's the authority behind the natural law. The founders also understood that because there are natural laws and duties, there are also natural rights. Can you see how this works? Since parents have a natural duty to care for their children, well, parents have a natural right then to care for them the best they can. Since we all have a natural duty never to take innocent human life, innocent humans have a natural right not to have their lives taken. Since we all have a natural duty to seek and follow the truth about God, we all have a natural right to seek that truth and to worship. Now, we've just listed 3 natural rights: the rights of parents, the rights to life, the right to religious liberty, but others, of course, can be added. For example, the right to honestly acquire property. Does natural law tell you, again, because we're talking about the Constitution, what kind of government that you should have? Well, no, but it does set limits on government. For example, because human beings are by nature free instead of slaves, if possible, they should be consulted about how they're ruled. And since we get our natural rights from the creator of our nature, not from the government shouldn't ever violate these rights. For example, no government should ever abolish religious liberty and make people worship the rulers, as long ago the Roman government made people worship the emperor. In fact, the rulers are on a moral leash, since government doesn't exist for its own good or for the good of the rulers, but for the common good of all, and for the protection of their natural rights and for the upholding of the natural law. Where are we now? Where are we now? In the 20th century, belief in the natural law faded. Many people came to believe in a variety of dangerous moral errors. For example, relativism, which is the idea that right and wrong are different for each person, or maybe different for each culture. You can see why relativism is problematic, can't you, if you're a relativist? Well, then you can't even defend justice against injustice, because the unjust person will merely say, oh, well, what's unjust for you is just for me. During the last few decades, though, many workers have worked hard to show why these moral errors, such as relativism, are wrong, and to remind Americans of their natural law heritage. So it is making a comeback. The natural law is real, it's true, it's indestructible, it has transformed Western civilization, it was invaluable in the development of our own American institutions, and I'm glad that I've had this chance to tell you about it.
That was
Thank
really,
you.
really great. You described that just top notch, really, really wonderfully. Okay, I've read your book and I was dog earing and highlighting a ton of things yesterday. I'm going to skip a little bit to the end of your book because you talk about elementary reasoning, and we give a lot of speeches on how to have a civic conversation. But before I get to that, talk a little, you say here on page 195, the American Republic was long the beneficiary of this tension. And you're talking about the tension between two things. It was like a string pulled tight between the cult of the individual and the cult of the state. Unfortunately, public philosophy of our own century has made the string go slack. And I just think, I've been thinking about this a lot. You know, man is the measure of all things is sort of where we're living today, you know, instead of having a moral sort of relativity to the natural law but I love your analogy of everybody knows whether you're American or South Korean or Chinese or Russian, you know that murder is wrong, right? So if you want to say, you know, hey, everybody's different, and so you can't say it's written on it's written on the heart because everybody knows murder is wrong, which is one of the things that you talk about. And it's a really good deflator of that argument that people want to say today. But I feel like we are a very empathetic people and as human beings. And I think we're actually becoming more and more enlightened, where we want everyone, there's a nice empathy in our sense of humanity. But what's happening with that is there's not a realism accompanying it. And so people no longer see that we as the cult of the individual are responsible, or that we're responsible with our God. There's this heavy reliance on the reliance on the cult of the state. And so now all of a sudden the government's getting bigger and bigger. And the bigger the government gets and the further away we get from moral law, the closer we are to sliding into debt and socialism and communism. And then we lose everything because we don't have that tension. And that's why I would like for you to talk a little bit about that. I love that analogy of the kind of tension that we've always had, this play, you know, that our Constitution and our checks and balances keep that tension. And now with the lack of knowledge of history, the lack of knowledge of philosophy, I think all students should learn philosophy in school. The lack of any sort of acknowledgement of any God in school anymore, it really has gone black, where it's just purely the state. And that's all anybody thinks about now is, what's the government going to do for me? So would you talk about how with that lack of slack and how it happened?
Yeah.
And the lack of tension?
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to talk about that. Now, there were a lot of things that I could respond to in your remarks, but I'll just focus on the business of the string and the slack. You know, think of pulling a string. At one end is an error that we could call extreme individualism. Individuals are important. The human person is a very special thing. It's made in the image of God. But that doesn't mean it's all about me. Okay, I have to have some concern for other people. And as a matter of fact, I'm a social being. If I say, hey, I'm looking out for number one, I don't care about anybody else. Frankly, you're not even doing a very good job of looking out for number one, because if you ignore everybody else, you're heading for misery. At the other end of the extreme, there are philosophies that ignore the individual, ignore the dignity of the human person, disbelieve that man is made in the image of God, and say that some other thing, the collectivity, the state is more important. As one writer once put it, it's as though human beings were plastic soldiers or lead soldiers that were melting together. When you put the tray into the oven, there's no longer an individual. There's only a sort of a mega individual, which is the state. Now that's both of these, and you think of human beings as merely instruments for accomplishing the tasks, tools that the state wants to accomplish. This is both of these two opposite errors. Errors usually do come in opposed opposites. Both of these two opposite errors are desperately wrong. And the truth is in between. The individual is very important, But we also have duties and obligations to other people under God. And we are social beings. And the good life can't even be good for me unless I have the opportunity to share it with others.
Mm-hmm. So how do we why has the slack gone away, and how do we bring it back?
Well, the why question is really tough. It's easy to see why certain errors are attractive. It's hard to say why people got sucked into them. And you can trace the roots of some of these errors back centuries and centuries. Some errors, they're very, and we could easily get really entangled too quickly in that. But what I can say is what's attractive about some of them. People are attracted to the idea that the state is the only thing, and that the individual doesn't matter, because they recognize and misunderstand that it's not all about me, and that sometimes I may have to make sacrifices for others, right? That's true. But the person who says the state is all powerful is misunderstanding that truth and taking it to a very radical extreme. Or to go in the other way, why is it attractive to some people to believe in a kind of a radical individualism, an individualist, radical, relativistic kind of libertarianism that says, I'm all that matters. Hey, I got my rights. That means I don't have to pay any attention to anybody else, and I can just walk all over you. Well, it's a distortion of a truth. Almost every error has some grain of truth in it, or it couldn't even be a plausible error. And the grain of truth there is that there is something special about the human person. As I said, he's made in the image of God. He's not like a spider. He's not like a brick. He's not a what. He's a who. That's Thomas Aquinas, the great natural law thinker, had said, the human person is the most perfect thing in all nature that God has created. That's true, but that doesn't mean it's all about me.
Hello, Dr. B.
Hi.
I weren't going to try it.
Dr. B is okay.
Your opening statements were very interesting, but get down to some more questions for you. So,
I always worry about that but.
So understanding that every man has his own beliefs, which cannot be taken away from him, but he lives in a country where these beliefs, which are most often Christian beliefs, are often persecuted in the public square. Can we truly say that we live in a place that natural law is respected and acted out?
Well, that's a very good question. One of the natural rights, I think, that is especially endangered in our time is the right to pursue the truth about God and to worship God without interference by the state. Now, obviously, there are certain kinds of interference with false religious liberty that are legitimate. If somebody says, "In the name of God, I'm going to blow up the subway train," in the name of God, I'm going to kill you because you don't believe the way that I do. That's not even the true worship of God. God himself is not pleased by these acts. It's legitimate for the state to prevent people from doing bloody acts like that. But to worship, people are, it's amazing in how many different ways public authorities have tried to tell churches and synagogues what they can teach, what they can't teach, who they can hire, who they should not hire, who they should say that God allows to be married, whether they may meet for worship. It's these kinds of things are very difficult. Our legislators have tried to forge some laws that strike this balance with greater and lesser success, sometimes lesser. But even such protections are in the law are not always honored. When it gets down to the level of enforcement and to local authorities, you often see some pretty awful things happening. Now, obviously, it isn't happening in this country as it does in many countries around the world. Churches are being bulldozed and bombed, and synagogues in China as we speak. But still, we can't be complacent about this. This is something that's in danger.
Great, thank you. So, I wonder what is the next thing to go? If you can attack natural law, and so once you attack this thing, and suppose the country as a whole, not everyone, but the 51% move past natural law. Is that our last stand, or is there anything else that can be attacked after that?
There are a lot of other things
close to how we were founded and what our founders meant us to be if we can move past natural law.
Yeah, well, I can take your question in either of two ways. You may be asking me, are there some other things that could be attacked? And I think that's true. The institution of the family and the institution of marriage is under attack. The relationship between parents and children is under attack by some schools who try to basically displace parents and say, you're not the moral teachers of your children. We are, and we're going to teach them what the state approves. But you may also be asking a somewhat different question. If people stop believing in the natural law, is there a way to keep things from going all the way downhill? Well, there's a paradox in this, and that's that although this gives hope, it's a discouraging thing, but you turn it over and there's some hope on the other side. People can stop consciously believing in the natural law, but because it is written on our hearts, it can't be completely wiped out of the human heart. And so many times during history, there have been times when natural law philosophy, natural law theory has been on the outs, but it keeps coming back. Human beings, for example, the family and its rules and norms and institutions are so deeply ingrained in human nature that even sociologists talk about this, in times of famine, of disaster, of disease, when families are separated from each other, their members go to heroic lengths to find each other. When families have been destroyed by collectivist institutions, parents have craved to see their children again. Children long for their moms and dads, and the institution comes back. The Roman poet Horace once remarked satirically, speaking of a human nature as though it was a kind of a donkey that you were just chasing out of the barn. You don't want to hear about that natural law stuff. He said, you can chase nature out with a pitchfork, but she always comes back. So that is the good thing. Even if people have never heard of the natural law, there are things that you can say to them that will make sense to them because it is written on the heart.
Great. That was a great answer. I thank you for answering both pieces of that question. I'm just kind of touching on each. I've kind of go a little deeper into the person. It's very clear that our nation as a whole lacks morality. And you can see that in Hollywood, in the elites and the movies that they're making and the music industry. It's very obvious. And there's a vast hole where God and morals should be.
Yeah.
So how do we counter a culture that has become so ingrained with self when in order to do that, one must accept the wrong that he has done while knowing natural law is always inherently in them?
Yeah. Okay. I think that's an excellent question. I think there are several parts to the answer. One thing that's very interesting, I don't think this gets other people off the hook, but it is very interesting that a lot of this anti-God, anti-morality mentality that you're talking about, and relativism and so forth, is an elite morality. Very powerful figures in films, in the media, in newspaper publishing and television and entertainment, and in the government promote this, and the most of the people aren't buying into that yet. Now, on the other hand, people are buying into it to some degree, and they're being damaged by it. It's another curious fact that although the propaganda against the need for stable families is mostly promoted by our upper classes, the damage to the family itself is mostly being experienced by our lower classes. And so there is this paradox going on. I think one of the things that we need to do is simply to recognize that we have, you said something that many people would agree with, but it needs to be said more often, that we have wandered away from these truths. We say things that sound compassionate at first, like, well, everybody has his own truth. That's not actually compassionate. That's like saying, well, everybody has his own diet. Everybody has what's nutritious for him, and there's somebody eating dirt. You aren't compassionate to him if you let him eat the dirt. What you have to do is say, brother, I got to tell you, you're going to make yourself sick. Okay, and we need to sometimes say, yes?
No, go.
I'm sorry, I'm here. Okay, and we need to sometimes, yes, we need to sometimes say that to each other. I think that we also need to examine our own moral lives, do an examination of conscience. And when we have done wrong, and let me tell you, we all have, we need to repent, and we need to turn around, and we need to admit it, and start and take care of our friends, and take care of our families, take care of our children, honor our parents, and start building our institutions again.
Okay.
Hey, that really leads me to my questions, because you said, because of what you just said about it is not compassionate to let somebody eat dirt because they think that that's a good diet for them. And
right.
That's so true. And I think that it must have been for generations. It's as if Christians were swallowed up by the culture in order to suppress Christian thought, because that is something that every Christian really should believe. Separation of church and state has been a perversion to me, rooted in really a dissonant philosophy, because it's like a phantom. It's not written anywhere in a law for our country. It contains ideas that are contradictory. It's a quote taken out of context, and yet in every classroom, in almost all of our institutions, we have accepted a secularism. And it, to me, is a divorce from reason for a couple reasons. But I think something very destructive it's done is it's pacified Christians, because how could a Christian separate his faith from his action? That is a divorce of what it means to be Christian in the first place. More so, it assumes another thing, that somehow anybody can act separated from their belief. For example, acting secularly doesn't function as its own set of beliefs, when in effect it does. So it creates a playing field where we can't meet ideas and challenge each other equally, because we're assuming somehow that our Christian idea is inferior in the public square because this is not the place for your idea, ignoring the fact that the philosophy underpinning our whole government, Western civilization, is rooted in certain Christian presuppositions in really a lot of observable ways.
Okay, well, I think this is just a brief remark before I really answer your question. Most of what you're talking about, I think, is not just Christian. These things are very important to Jews and to many other people who believe in God. And proponents of the natural law have been found in Christianity, in Judaism. For instance, Rabbi Michael Novak has talked a great deal about the natural law. Yeah, these aren't exclusively Christian ideas. Now, as to separation of church and state, whether separation of church and state is a bad thing or a good thing depends on what you mean by it. One of the things that people fight over, people don't just fight over things like who gets more money, or who pays least taxes, or who gets a bigger house. People often fight over how you're going to define words. If by separation of church and state you mean merely that the church is a different institution than the state, and the state is a different institution than the church, and neither one runs the other, well, that's a good idea. You know, if what you mean by it is, as you're right, it isn't in the Constitution, but if you mean by it is what's in the Constitution, that there isn't going to be an official church run by the government, and that there is going to be liberty of religion, then that's a good thing. If, on the other hand, by separation of church and state, and many people do use the term in this terrible way. If by separation of church and state you mean that you're supposed to hang up your faith and your most deeply held religious convictions at the door before you walk in and vote or express your opinion on matters of concern to the community, that's crazy. You know, that's crazy. And the person who is demanding that in the name of his own convictions. He's pretending that he's being neutral about religion, but there is no such thing as neutrality. What he's really doing is replacing a sort of a secular religion of his own devising and pretending that it isn't a religion in order to push yours out of the public square and to shut Jews up and to shut Christians up. So that would be very bad.
And it's something that I think most of us struggle with. Trying to balance, because it's accepted in our school system, and particularly in liberal arts education. We went to a smaller, fairly, good school, and when we were in a history class, some type of history class, and the professor was a constructivist, which was some form of she didn't really believe in a reality. It was like everything is just our
socially constructed.
Yes, and even down to the material existence. So to meet that, there was different things I was reading, and C.S. Lewis had wrote and made me realize that something that's remarkable is that every culture has a morality, a recognition of right and wrong. And even if the right and wrongs are maybe different, every culture recognizes a right and wrong, and that's remarkable in and of itself. So when we would be in class and we would be saying, well, you can't have that idea because this one can be traced back to Christianity, which is something that everybody doesn't accept. It's like your brain hurts because you're thinking to yourself, but you're having ideas that everybody doesn't accept too, but you're able to say that mine don't count because mine are a religion.
Yes. No, that's right. People often deploy certain forms of neutrality, social constructivism, relativism, in order to say, look, everybody has different moral opinions, and so you're not allowed to speak your moral opinion. Well, the person speaking has just expressed a moral opinion. He's told you what it's wrong for you to do. And if you really enforce this idea, you can't express your moral opinion. That's intolerant. Then he can't speak either. You can't even explain why tolerance is a good thing, and tolerance is a good thing, rightly understood. You can't even explain why tolerance is a good thing unless you make moral judgments. Now notice, by the way, nobody, not even the most determined social constructivist or relativist or neutralist, nobody says we have to tolerate everything. I'm going to tolerate the guy breaking down my door and shooting me. Okay, nobody says that. Now, in order to say, and so what toleration is about, in other words, is not tolerate everything, but it's tolerating what ought to be tolerated. And in order to know what ought to be tolerated and why it's good to tolerate them, you have to make moral judgments. People think that's talking about toleration and social constructivism is somewhere that gets you off the hook of moral judgment. No, in order to make sense of such virtues as toleration, you have to exercise moral judgment. You mentioned social constructivism. That reminds me of an occasion. This was a couple of decades ago. I'm a geezer, right? You understand that. There was a guest speaker who visited my department, one of my departments. I'm in the government and in the philosophy department. This was the government department. There was a guest speaker and who was expressing a social constructivist point of view, and he defended what he called the consensus theory of truth. That truth is what everybody agrees to. Not what corresponds to reality, mind you, but what everybody agrees to. And so somebody asked him, well, what if everybody agreed that the mushroom was not poisonous, but it was poisonous, and you ate it and you got sick? Wouldn't that show that truth is not just a social construction? The fascinating thing about this is that he said many interesting things for about 5 minutes in answer, but he never answered the question. And everybody knew that he was dodging it, and nobody said so. So these things are ridiculous.
That's a perfect segue into my question. I'm back. Sorry. That's a perfect segue. And Julian Jordan,
Sure.
that was terrific. And Julian Jordan, I just want to mention this, what you say here on page 194, you talk about John Locke. And you said, though he correctly views rights as something we deduce from the demands of morality, rather than something that protects us against them. So I think that kind of fits in a little bit with what y'all were talking about. But also what you just said about not answering the question. And I love what you just said, because to me, it represents where we are in society now. Is truth is what? How did you say that? Truth is what everybody thinks it is. Was that, what did you say? How'd you say that?
Yeah, people say truth is what everybody agrees to, which you can refute by just saying, well, I don't agree.
yeah. So, but we have to write that down. I'm going to write that down. Truth is what everybody agrees to. That's the mentality today. And the people that are the loudest want to say, but it's the truth, and everybody has to agree to it. And then you're censored or canceled or shut down if you don't agree with their truth. And I think that this is really where we have a problem in our society. And then what you just said is that he could never answer the question. And so that leads to page 221 of your book, which is elementary reasoning. And I really want to talk about this elementary reasoning, because you say here, I just think you're fantastic. I'm so thrilled we have this time with you today. People need to logically reason, something we don't teach anymore. Now it's just like, this is the truth and you have to accept it, which is what Julian and Jordan were saying. But I don't know anything about logical reasoning. You say, people will exclaim. That can be remedied. Here's a short lesson in applied logic. Whenever someone makes a claim to you about politics or morals, including, quote, morals are all relative anyway, which is what I mentioned earlier, or no one should be required to surrender his autonomy. You might hear that in political theory conference. Ask these three questions. So in other words, if someone makes a statement such as truth is what everybody decides it is, or I didn't get a chance to write that down. You say, this is what you said. So I want you to talk about it. Julian, Joy, this is really cool. Aubrey, Jeanette, Kathy, listeners. One, you ask them, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? This is how we talk to people that don't want to listen to us, and that, you know, we feel that won't have a conversation. So when they say something outlandish, what do you mean by that? And number two, you say, how do you know it's true? And number three, what difference does it make? So talk about those three things, and I hope we all write those down. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? How do you know it's true? And what difference does it make? That's really fantastic. You want to elaborate on that for us?
Sure. Why do we need to ask, what do you mean by that? Because people often use very fuzzy words that don't have a lot of meaning maybe, but that are packed with emotion, and that they can twist like pretzels to seem to mean whatever they want it to mean according to the occasion. So you want to pin them down and make them be consistent. And we should be honest. If it's okay for people to do the same thing to us and to say to us, well, what do you mean? If we don't ask people what they mean, we may also, even if they're being perfectly reasonable and not trying to be deceptive, we may still misunderstand them, and we talk like this instead of like this. We can't even coherently disagree with each other. Okay, the second thing, how do you know that it's true? In an age where people sometimes think that the mere fact that I assert something is a good reason to believe it, we need to remind ourselves, of course, and also remind other people that no, there have to be other reasons. Whether something is true doesn't depend on whether I believe it. Rather, whether I believe it should depend on whether it's true. And we should look at the evidence. Sometimes people say, oh, but there can't be any evidence for moral beliefs or reasons to believe in God or something like that. Well, actually, we give reasons for them all the time. And even when somebody says something like, there aren't any true moral statements, and so you have to practice tolerance. Well, he's just made a moral statement. He's given a reason. It's just a bad one because it's inconsistent. Okay, the third thing is what does it matter? Suppose that what you're saying is true. then what would that imply? What would follow from that? Whether it means practically, how should we then live, or whether it means logically, what other truths would then be true if you're right? Then we know what we're working with. I mean, who knows? The other guy might persuade us about something. We hope that we're honest enough to allow ourselves to be defeated by a better argument if confronted by one. But we want the other guy to do that too. And part of that is knowing what we're talking about and what these things do mean and what they do imply. So that's always the first step. There are other things about how to avoid various kinds of fallacies, and both fallacies of distraction, like this is a fallacy of distraction. It isn't a logical fallacy. It's sometimes called an informal fallacy. If you say that, I'll beat you up, so change your mind. But there are also logical fallacies where you merely point out that an inference from two premises doesn't actually generate the conclusion. We just need to learn to do both of those things to avoid both kinds of fallacies.
You go on to talk about these fallacies at great length, the different types of fallacies in your book. I really recommend this book, Written on the Heart. But you say one of the examples of an illegitimate appeal to authority is scientific people don't believe in God, so there must not be any God.
Yeah. Now, you know, there is such a thing. This is often misunderstood. People have bumper stickers now that say questioned authority. Well, that's overstated. There are some authorities who should be listened to, and there are some authorities who should be more rigorously questioned. And it depends on whether they're authorities and what they're talking about. If I want to know whether diamonds are harder than sapphires, I'm going to ask a geologist. And his authority actually makes some difference. But if I want to know what are some of the reasons for believing that God exists, the geologist may not have anything particular to tell me. So it's a mistake to think that authority counts for nothing. But it's also a mistake to think that any authority counts for everything. And the fallacy is can go in either of the two extremes, and we have to know when to use authority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're kind of full circle. I'm going to give this over to Kathy now. We are full circle with everyone wants to give authority to the state now. That's just kind of where everyone thinks the authority is, which I don't believe that's the case. You know, the authority is supposed to be limited in our state. Okay, so we can have that tension that Dr. B talks about. We can have our tension between the individual and the state. Okay, Kathy, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Dr. B. This has been fascinating. We've really enjoyed having you on today. We've got some wonderful audience questions. Sandy Thatcher asks, unlike statutory or even constitutional law, there's no enforcement mechanism for natural law. So doesn't that make the use of natural law importantly different? Or doesn't that— There
are punishments for the violation of natural.
Well, and I read his question wrong. So doesn't that make the use of law for natural law importantly different? That's how he wrote it.
Yeah, this is a question that often comes up. I think the answer is no, because the premise of the question is incorrect. We tend to think, well, there's a penalty or a punishment. There's enforcement. In the case of the human law, I speed, I may be put in jail. There's a penalty for enforcing for violating the divine law because of what God does. But actually, there are penalties for violating the natural law too. Look, they are natural consequences instead of civilly enforced consequences. If I act contrary to the laws of friendship, I'm going to lose my friends. If I lie to myself, I'm going to eventually become so confused that I'm not going to have an easy time telling what's true and what's false anymore and keeping track of my own lies. And that's especially true because, you know, when you tell yourself one lie, you usually have to tell yourself another lie to cover up that first lie, and then another lie to cover up that second lie. And it just gets out of our control. If I cut myself, I bleed. If I act contrary to the natural law that tells me that I should respect the integrity of my reasoning powers, and I just for recreation get intoxicated and use drugs, I'm going to make myself stupid. If abandon my wife and children, I may have no one to stroke my brow and comfort me when I'm old and sick. If I jump from, can I say this? If I jump from bed to bed to bed, I may destroy in myself the very capacity for intimacy in a loving marriage. There really are natural penalties, natural consequences for the violation of the natural law, and that's even apart from the penalties of conscience, which are numerous. I mean, not only the bad feeling, oh, I did wrong, but also, you compulsively find yourself paying a price. People sometimes who've done something terribly wrong and they can't admit it to themselves start punishing themselves. That's a natural consequence too, because conscience is something that is an aspect of our moral intellect.
I love that, the natural consequences to violating the natural laws. In that same vein, Sandy Thatcher also asked about, in some societies, honor killing is something that's fairly accepted. And he asks, how does that override the natural law against killing other humans, or how do you explain such paradoxes when some societies accept honor killing?
Yeah, it doesn't override the natural law. What it means is simply that people can violate the natural law. To say that the natural law is written on the heart is not to say that everybody always acknowledges it or admits it, or that they always follow it. You see that the problem is there's a paradox, because there are two universals, not just one. There is a law that's written on the heart of all men, but there's also a universal desire to evade it. We really like to cut excuses for ourselves. I mean, so that we will say, if we're murdering, we'll say that isn't murder. Okay. A spectacular example of this is the Nazis. You would think that the Nazis didn't know that it was wrong to deliberately take innocent human life, because they killed 6 million Jews and about 6 million other people who hadn't done anything. You would think that they didn't know that it was wrong to deliberately take innocent human life. Actually, they did. Otherwise, why would they have written propaganda trying to pretend to themselves and to other people that the Jews were not human and that they weren't innocent? And even at that, deep down, they knew better. Robert J. Lifton, a physician who studied the Nazi physicians in the death camps, said that he quoted a Wehrmacht neuropsychiatrist who had studied death camp soldiers who had terrible psychological effects. They had nightmares of their victims accusing them. Now, on the surface, they were believing an ideology that said, I'm not doing anything wrong. Deep down, they knew better.
Very good point. And this is a great question as we start to wrap here, from Gary Porter. Gary says, I'm continually amazed at the number of people I encounter who have never heard of natural law, and many lawyers who have never heard of it. How do we turn this national ignorance around?
Well, there are two things. First, we have to talk about it. And that's what we're doing now. But second, even people may have conditioned reflexes. Natural law, oh, I've heard of that. That's not true. All right, don't worry about it. You don't have to use the expression, but you can talk about the natural law without using the expression natural law. For example, you can warn somebody, watch out, there's a banana peel there, you'll slip on it, even if you don't try to teach him Newton's law of gravity, okay? Or about Einstein and curved space. You can tell people a lot of things just by appealing to what they already dimly know and trying to make sense of it to them. And that gradually gets them back into a frame of mind where they are able to hear you again when you explicitly bring up natural law.
Well, and I'd like to share with you just another listener comment, because I think this will please you from today. Katie Gostomski writes, have really enjoyed this talk. Just purchased Dr. B's book as I was listening, looking forward to reading it. And she also says she's going to use this recording in her worldview and constitutional literacy classes. So our listeners are
great
having you on today. And Janine, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Well, I'm so glad.
Yeah,
I'm so glad. Thank you.
I know, you're fantastic. We hope you'll come back. I was just thinking, if someone were to say, "Oh, natural law, it doesn't exist," then we say, "What do you mean by that? How do you know it's not true? And what difference does it make?" Jeanette, we're going to put this in our civil conversation. I'll go out with this funny story, which when we launched Constituting America in 2010, I was on a radio show and talking about the importance of the Constitution in a nonpartisan way and all this. And he said to me, the Constitution, I don't like it. And so I was sort of stunned, which is the knee-jerk reaction, sort of like natural law, ooh. And so he said, in the Constitution, I don't like it. So I was quiet for a minute and I said, which part? And he said, what? I said, which part do you not like? And he couldn't answer anything, right? Because it was just this sort of, knee-jerk, reaction that no one likes the Constitution anymore. So, when I asked him to be specific, he's like, what? And, the flip side of that is I say, well, if there is something specific that you don't like, that's what the amendment process is for. So it's wonderful to have these discussions.
Yes.
Go ahead.
People do say some of the silliest things against natural law. I gave a talk to a group of law students once. I was invited to speak at another university to a meeting of a group of law students called the Federalist Society. And one of the law teachers, one of the professors, came up to me after the talk, and he said, "Well, that was all very interesting, thank you, but there couldn't be a natural law, could there? Because then there wouldn't be any fun anymore." I didn't ask him, but I should have. Well, just what kind of fun do you want to have, sir, that the natural law would prohibit?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Well, we could philosophize on this all day long. And I guess we have to wrap because it's 2:00, but I hope you'll come back because I just think you're fascinating and wonderful.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
you. And I thank everyone. I thank Julian, and Kathy and Jeanette and Aubrey, but Dr. B, everyone should go get your book, Written on the Heart, The Case for Natural Law by Jay. I'm going to make sure I say this right. Professor Dr. J. Budziszewski.
Budziszewski, that's right.
Budziszewski. Okay, so check out his wonderful book, and Dr. B, thank you for coming on today. We appreciate you so much.
My great pleasure. My great pleasure.
Yeah, see, and I found you on Amazon. That's how I found you. I was looking at books in natural law. I saw your book. I'm like, oh, I'm going to get this. And then I bought it, and I started reading it. I said, Kathy, we have to do our next series on natural law. So we built this whole series around you as our finale guest here. So thank you so much, finale in the series. I mean, we would have had you for all four, but we know you're in great demand down there. So thank you so much for being on our show today. Okay, and so I want to let y'all know that our next podcast series is going to be on immigration, then and now. So when we talk about that, so we're going to do, I think, two, right, Kathy? Two. We decided on two-part series. To really understand what immigration was like back then. And once again, a lot of people don't really understand what the stringency of the immigration policies back then and what's the Constitution have to say about all that and where we are today with it. Correct, Kathy? So you don't want to miss the next two episodes. Anything you want to say going out, Kathy?
Well, we want to just encourage everybody to get a copy of Written on the Heart, The Case for Natural Law, as part of our book club, because we're going to be having our book club meeting Thursday evening, April 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, and we will be discussing Dr. B's book even more. And we'll be taking some of those passages that Janine marked today and reading them out loud, and then asking our listeners, all of y'all, for input. So join us at our book club Thursday, April 22nd, 7 p.m. Eastern.
May I mention, people can find out a lot more information about natural law at my website, the Underground Thomist, THOMIST.
Great.
Oh, cool. We'll have to do that before the Underground Thomist, as in Thomas Aquinas.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Right on the button.
And tell us as we go out, just because I'm going to make sure I write it down. My pen didn't work. truth is what everybody decides it is. Is that what you said?
The consensus theory of truth is the truth is what everybody agrees to. Mm-hmm. It's false.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't agree. So it must be false.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? How do you know it's true? What difference does it make? All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening today. Take care.
Bye. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks again.